Josh Frydenberg then enjoying these numbers?
He's certainly pleased to see that we have a positive news for the Australian economy and that there is a notable growth for the most recent quarter of the economy. As you said, we had there 3.3% growth for the September quarter. Now, look, of course, that does need to be factored into the sheer scale of the contraction from the previous quarter, which was 7%. So this is certainly not a suggestion that we're anywhere near back to where we were, but it is a very solid growth pattern to have posted, particularly given the situation in Victoria for this period. Josh Frydenberg describing it as turning a corner, which I think is notable for getting a sense of how the government sees this particular moment in time as it heads towards the end of the calendar year, coming up to a budget update. It certainly has a far more positive outlook at this time than it did even a month ago.
So how does the picture break down across the country?
Well, look, it really splits the country into two, Victoria and the rest. We see substantial improvements in main drivers, in particular household consumption across much of the country as restrictions are lifted. But in Victoria, it's a different picture. So whilst we saw a 3.3% growth in this quarter across the country nationally, we know that if Victoria hadn't gone into the second lockdown that it did, that well could have been a 5% growth figure. So you're basically accounting for 1.7% of a GDP hit on the nation because of the circumstances in Victoria. Now, of course, that's inescapable because of the health circumstances, but perhaps gives you an indication of just how severe the various lockdowns can be on the national economy.
And what did the Treasurer say about jobs, which after all has been the big focus?
Yeah, look, he's saying that there are now 700,000 jobs that have been saved because of JobKeeper and JobSeeker measures, and certainly the employment figures are something that have been improving with each update and each round of official figures that we get. But that certainly doesn't mean we're in a positive frame here. There's a lot of concern, particularly around younger people, those in particular industries, arts, recreation, accommodation, hospitality, where the jobs aren't rebounding as quickly as they have in some other sectors. So that is still going to be something the federal government will continue to look closely at, because that is really going to be the benchmark of when Australia comes out of this economic hit rather than an official recession or not.
Mal, how do these numbers compare to the latest OECD outlook?
Look, this is an interesting comparison. It's always hard to do it directly because the OECD looks at the calendar year as a whole, whereas what the federal government is looking at the moment is the quarterly figures based on financial years instead. But the OECD is suggesting that Australia's growth for this year is looking to be a 3.8% contraction. So that's averaging out the 4 quarters that we're seeing and yet to see the last one. And that would certainly put Australia several full percentage points in a better position in terms of GDP than a vast majority of comparable countries around the world. So that is certainly a positive figure. But the OECD also notes that Australia still has some reckoning to come, given that there is a substantial amount of fiscal support. So that is things like spending on the JobKeeper wage subsidy, additional support through the supplement to the JobSeeker payment, and that those things are due to be wound off in the coming months. So they're already being scaled back, and the OECD warns that there is always a risk associated with that, of that scaling back of support whilst there is still so much uncertainty ahead.
OK, Melissa, thank you. Let's get market reaction to these numbers now with our finance reporter, Sue Lannin. Sue, what's the picture?
Yeah, well, the Australian dollar certainly held up after the GDP figures came out, better than expected. As we've discussing, the economy growing by 3.3% over the September quarter. So the Australian dollar is currently at 73.7 US cents. So it's actually come off its highs. At one point, it was up about 1/3% after those figures came out at 11:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Now, the Australian market actually lost its gains after the GDP figures came out. It's currently down about 0.4%, both the All Ordinaries Index and the ASX 200. So most sectors in the red, miners are holding up. So one of the reasons it's falling is that for the time being, probably no new government stimulus. There's been so much stimulus pumped into the economy, and that partial rebound in economic growth suggests that it shows there is an economic recovery in place, but whether or not it keeps going is another thing. And just looking at the broader market now, looking at the top movers, Crown Resorts is slightly higher. Now, the casino firm has appointed a new head of financial crime to crack down on money laundering at its casinos. Sandfire Resources flying high on plans to build a new copper mine in Botswana in Africa. Mesoblast has surged. This is regarding fast tracking in the US of its COVID-19 treatment. Aerial mapping firm Nearmap has led the falls on the ASX 200. Wally Parsons and Goodman Group also going down. Roz?
Just back to the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, speaking about these GDP numbers, he really highlighted household spending. That was seen as key to this performance, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. That's something that the Bureau of Statistics pointed out helped drive this rebound in services, along obviously with government spending. So there was a record quarterly jump, in fact, in household spending. Let's have a listen now to what the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, had to say about that.
Today's September quarter results were driven by a 7.9% increase in household consumption, the largest increase on record. Consumption was up in 14 of the 17 categories, with the largest increases being in transport, hotels, cafes and restaurants. New public final demand increased by 1.7% to be 6.1% higher through the year. Dwelling investment was up by 0.6%, following 8 consecutive quarterly falls.
Yes, so there's the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Quite upbeat, but quite cautious as well about the future. He wouldn't give any predictions about what he thought would happen in the December quarter. He did stress it's very contingent on whether there's a vaccine. And obviously the Australian economy is much smaller than it was a year ago, particularly with the travel industry almost shut down. And that's finance.
Thanks, Sue. Well, to get some business reaction to today's growth figures, let's speak with business owner Lauren Larouge, who runs a nail salon in Western Sydney. Hi, Lauren. How do you feel then when you hear that growth has increased by just over 3%? How does that number relate to your experience?
It does give me hope that growth is on the rise. However, I know from my experience in the salon, it's still been a very, very slow, if at all, gradual increase in business for us, just because so many events, etc., have been cancelled this year. Usually this is formal season, wedding season, people are going away on holidays, big gatherings are happening, and, you know, we didn't expect it to be the same this year, but it has been pretty quiet.
Yeah. So how long did you shut your doors for during the pandemic? And what's your plan to get business going?
Sure. I believe the shutdown was for about 6 weeks. To be honest, I've just kind of blocked that period from my memory to a certain extent. I survived through it. And then as soon as I was allowed back into the salon, it was just absolute guns a-blazing. Sorry, someone's just entering my shop. No, not now, sorry. We have
maybe
people
you
actually coming door to door to sell things, because that's pretty much where our economy is at the moment. Everyone's just trying to make it work in any way they can.
Have you got staff working for you, Lauren?
No, I am lucky in the respect that I'm a sole trader, because I didn't have the responsibility of having to worry about my staff. But just even in looking after myself, my heart just goes out there for businesses with staff that they have to think about, as well as keeping their doors open and food on their table.
But you're confident you can survive this?
Oh, absolutely. There's no other option. I've been in business for 7 years, but it took me about almost 5 years to get my own salon. Now that I've finally got it, I will find a way to make it work, because I'm not giving up.
And how busy were you this time last year before coronavirus? We'd even heard of it.
I would estimate, just to break it down the most simple terms, I would estimate that I'd have about between 5 and 6 clients a day. Now I've had less than 5 or 6 clients a week. Easy. So it's been very different.
So how are you going to get those customers back through the door?
Well, I mean, we're always trying to promote ourselves on social media, any small business owners, mainly because A, people live on social media, and B, because largely it's free. So that really helps during these times. Word of mouth, just reminding people vouchers are available for the holiday season because there is still some online spending happening. So we're all just trying to think outside the box. But at the end of the day, we can't force people into the salon. So just have to remain upbeat, optimistic, believe it's going to work out, tell every man and his dog that'll listen that I do nails, and just hope that it, translates into revenue eventually.
Yeah. But hearing the Treasurer using the word recovery, does that give you hope?
Yep. Look, I mean, it's always wonderful to hear people, talk about financial recovery, etc., in government, politics, or higher end businesses. But for small business, when we see people, lighting up our phones or walking in the door, then I'll believe it's happening. But I always need to live with hope, because otherwise, what's the alternative? Just be miserable and give up. And for me, that's not an alternative. So, got to be optimistic. It's the only way to survive 2020.
We wish you all the best, Lauren Larouge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.